everybody, and welcome to the Rise World Summit and this roundtable on measuring, monitoring, and managing the SDG programs by the Community of Evaluators South Asia. We're really pleased to invite you, to have you, and welcome you for this roundtable. We've been having roundtables since yesterday, as many of you would know, and many of you have also attended. And you all know how special and important the roundtables are because of the way we look at the outcomes that we get from this. And while every single roundtable we have is related to the SDGs and multiple SDGs at that, uh, there are three roundtables this time at the Rise World Summit that has actually complete focus on the all of the SDGs. And yesterday we had two. One was on SDG accountability, and the second one was on SDG mapping and interlinkages. As you can imagine, the first one really had a focus on stakeholders in the sense of, who is accountable for the SDGs, and how why do we kind of hold them accountable. So the focus was really that, and it was really an excellent session with so many diverse stakeholders bringing in their perspective of why would they be held accountable. Then we had the SDG mapping and interlinkages, which again voices from across the world. And I must tell you that we are now at 52 countries from around the world participating in the summit. So it was really great to again see the kind of diversity of programs and how they look at the SDG, how they measure and look at it. But still, that was more from a programmatic. And I think today this is really the crux and the fitting finale to that conversation on SDGs, which is about monitoring, measuring, and managing it. So I think this is the how that we are now come to, which is so important for us to actually action what we discussed yesterday, to make it a reality and to make sure that we do it with as much efficiency and effectiveness. I'm not sure how many people attended the opening plenary yesterday, but Dr. Yasmin Ali Haq, the UNICEF representative to India, had spoken specifically about the decade of evaluation for the SDGs, because as I said, this is the decade of action for achieving the SDGs, and she focused on these two things and said how really important. And therefore this roundtable for me is extremely important and very close to me personally as well, I mean, being an evaluator. So I'm really looking forward, Chela, to make sure that this is something that we have some great outcomes from, deep conversations and very meaningful takeaways. So with that, I once again welcome you to the Rise World Summit as well as to this roundtable co-hosted by Community of Evaluators South Asia. And to take this further, I would also request Mr. Chela Durai Solomon to say a few words as the president of COE South Asia. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Karen. That's wonderful to get that interaction. Good morning to everybody. Special greetings from Community of Evaluators South Asia. I must say, Karen and Idob, her institution is also a member of COE South Asia. It's a pleasure. So that is the small kind of introduction to start with. Maybe a few more things about the session on measuring and monitoring to manage SDG programs. Actually, as Karen started, now when she said this whole summit, so most of the or everything is boiled down to SDGs. This session as well, it's ultimately is boiling down to SDGs. But however, here we provide a special focus on M&E, that's monitoring and evaluations. And we also have a focus on partnership of multi-stakeholders, which is also very crucial. So really, if you look at these SDGs, there are so many components, very important components are revolving around, without which it's very difficult to reach SDGs. And we are just about 10 years to reach that goal, SDG goals. There are components, like when I say that, one is this monitoring and evaluations. And then we also have the component of the partnership, And we have the important aspect of the different stakeholders, actually. Stakeholders, the government, UN bodies, OPAs, CSR is very particularly, because this session, one of our interest is that, the CSR programs and how we can really kind of get to them. As far as we understand that the OPAs like COE, though we have had programs, but not necessarily a kind of good partnership or collaboration to go on. So we also look at the different aspects or different kind of challenges related to the CSR and the CSR programs, and how we can really kind of build the partnership between these different multi-stakeholders. So this is to start with, and we have been able to get very renowned expertise amongst us. To start with, we have Dr. Neeta Goel. She's a senior program officer from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and she's with us. And then we have Dr. Krishna Belbais from Nepal. He is an international development evaluation expert with 25 years of progressively responsible positions with the United Nations and Children's Funds in various roles involving program management, policy, etc. And then we also have Miss Mabel Abraham, is a CSR group head from L&T, and she also has vast experience, like 25 years in Larsen and Toubro. She is with us. Then we have Dr. Tita Raj Thakkal. He is also from Nepal. He is a secretary from the Office of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers of the Common Government of Nepal. Then we have also another experts from Niti Aayog, Mr. Sundar Mishra. Hopefully he has come in. So he is also with us, and he has also got 2 decades of experience working with multi-sectoral policy and management experience. And we have also Mr. Ashwin Naidu, is a corporate sustainability team, Tata Capital Finance. And he is also with us. So we have brought together a good number of the hope that this session really helpful to the participants, and also we not just for this this session alone. So I will not go very much into the introduction, but let me also say a few things about how we are going to go ahead. Karen, of course, as Rai Summit, they have their own way of moderating the session. And we have had a couple of discussions with Karen, and finally we agreed on a kind of combination of their approach and our approach. What we feel is that, it's not we are not going to kind of line up all the 6 and ask the expertise to talk one after the other. And we would we'll break that into kind of 3 kind of segments. We will start with 2 experts, and then we will have sufficient time for the interactive session. Actually, this this organizer of Rai Summit has been very, very insistent, and we also believe, though, if the session has to be a kind of interactive, it's not a kind of top down. So we will start with 2 expertise. First, to start with Neeta Goel from Bill Gates Foundation. Then we will also follow with Dr. Krishna Belbais. Then we will have a kind of so at least 20 minutes session where we want to really have the kind of interactive. Then subsequently we will go with the other expertise. Then it's also when once after this kind of 2 presentations, when we go into taking the challenges from the participants or the questions from the participants, I would request the participant to use the question and answer box. That will be easier for us to take it up and expect the expertise to respond. Also, just kindly note that at least the expertise, the questions which come up, whether it is in the beginning or in the later stage, not necessarily only these 2 who have presented or they are going to present I mean, in the sense, the ones who will be presenting later should respond to certain things. So whoever the expertise feel that they can respond, they can show up their hands and they can start do their response. So again, there are some kind of guidelines, and there is not going to be a kind of strict rules and regulation as to this is how it is. As the session goes, and we'll see how that goes. And I will also request Karen to come in whenever she feels it's necessary. And we also have with us Rajiv Nandi, who is supporting us along with Mr. Anthony, I guess. So also the other support from Karen's team. So that will be a kind of support we will get from our team. And also we especially welcome COE board members who are present in this session. So let me start with that. I would request Dr. Neeta Goyal to start, and I would suggest that all the expertise stick to 5 to 7 minutes, not more than that. So because we would really like the participants to come in, and we want them to be a kind of part of it, not just listening to whatever the expert says. Okay, so with this kind of background, and can I ask Neeta Goyal to come in, please?
Sure, Chela. Thank you to you and Rajiv and colleagues at COE and the organizers of the RISE Summit for this opportunity to join this virtual roundtable and have this conversation. I believe we have a room full of experts. So I think I'm as eager as you to hear what everyone has to share. So I'll keep my comments limited to a few to kick us off, but I'm also looking forward to the interactions. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us bright and early for this particular roundtable on a Friday morning. Appreciate your being here and look forward to hearing from you. So SDGs and evaluation. We have 17 SDGs, we have 169 targets, and we have 231 indicators. So with all of these, one would assume that it's enough to kind of, if we just monitor these particular targets and indicators, we should be good enough. Why then do we need evaluation? So I thought I'd start by, in the interest of time, not listing everything that evaluation can help us with, but just a few things to keep us focused. How can evaluation help when we already have all of these indicators we can monitor? I think evaluation can help us in at least 3 ways. One is by helping us to assess what works for whom and in what context. By helping us identify who is getting left out, so that development can be inclusive. So when data is collected on the unique indicators, we are not necessarily able to tell if vulnerable populations are getting covered, and evaluation can help us do that. So that's one. 2, it can help us understand to what extent did we meet our goals. So if books or school supplies are distributed, does that mean children are learning? Evaluation can help us figure that out. If toilets are built, evaluation can help us tell, are people using them? Because it's not enough to build schools and toilets. We also need to ensure that the concerned population is actually using them. And thirdly, the evaluation can help us emphasize the sustainable part of the sustainable development goals. So while it's true, we may be able to check the box on, okay, toilets provided for everyone, or schools constructed, or children, we have a high rate of school enrollment, but were we able to sustain this in the long run? Because it's only when we are able to sustain it that we can actually genuinely say that, okay, now the SDGs and development goals are met. So then the question arises in terms of how do we do this? What are the challenges to evaluation? Is it easier said than done? And yes, it's true, it's a tough battle. What are the challenges and some of the ways around them? One, could we design evaluations to be more inclusive? So deliberately and consciously considering issues of equity and social justice into every evaluation. I've read a lot of evaluations which don't deliberately look at equity and social justice, maybe because the donors didn't ask, maybe because the commissioners of the study just wanted to check whether the intervention works. But we all know interventions can work and yet not reach certain target populations. So is there a way to ensure we can capture the experiences of vulnerable groups and be their voices so that we can not just accomplish impact, but also sustain it? Two, how do we meet the challenge of establishing synergies and collaborations? So we have in the international development world, we have a very vibrant ecosystem of governments, corporates, civil societies, community institutions, and other stakeholders, all working together to accomplish the SDGs. That's a plus. On the downside, it means that our efforts are often individual or isolated or fragmented. So then the big question is, how can we build on each other's strengths to establish synergies and optimize resources? Is it possible that efforts in one area, whether it's in terms of designing evaluations or designing interventions, can we bring that together? Instead of doing one tiny evaluation because of a lack of funding constraint, could we pool resources and try to do interventions and evaluations that have a larger impact? How do we work together? And I think in this COVID time, we have been much better at working together, even internationally, which explains why we have a vaccine within 1 year, which is unprecedented. So it is possible to do this. We just need to look for ways to do it. And finally, I think a big part of evaluation is, or trying to evaluate SDGs, is building capacities on evaluation. Because this is an essential part. We need, all of us have, perhaps those who work in the evaluation or in the international development space, all of us have run into evaluation in some capacity or the other, either as users or as doers of evaluation. It's important that we build local capacity on evaluation, not just that we invite folks from academia or international universities, etc., but to build local skills so that people who are more familiar with context are also engaged in conducting evaluations. And this includes building capacities of communities to do their own monitoring and evaluation, because it's not so much about top-down development. We also need to work with the communities who are being affected. In the 1990s, disability rights activists used to use the slogan of "nothing about us without us." And this was to indicate that no policies or interventions should be decided upon without the participation of those who are going to be affected by that intervention or policy. And I think this is a good goal that we as evaluators and those in the development space can aspire to. I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be opportunities for further conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nita. So that's, thank you so much for your opening comments, and you have made very specific points. So I don't want to stay with that, but we will come back to that. So I will move on to Dr. Krishna Belbase. So he can also kind of come with very specific challenges and how we should be really kind of looking at it. Perhaps after that, we will open up the floor for the participants to come in. And in the meanwhile, I would request once again, participants would like to come in, and please use the question and answer box, and we will take it up. Now, can I invite Dr. Krishna Belbase to come in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Can you hear me? It's clear?
Yes, we are clear.
Okay, and good morning to everybody. I'm actually speaking from New York. It's a bit late here, evening time, but delighted to join this very exciting summit first time. I'm going to take a little bit of broader approach, because the question I was given was to talk about the challenge of bringing different stakeholders together in terms of measurement, monitoring, and evaluation of the SDGs. So I'm going to start with the stakeholders themselves. And I think when I looked at the theme of the conference, We are looking at the private sector, civil society, public sector, obviously. And within private sector, two initiatives come out strongly. One is the private-public partnership, which is evolving, although there are many, many challenges. The other one is the CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative, which is also growing, gradually. Of course, government programs, and also the role of the CSOs. And within that, the particular importance role of VOPEs. I would also like to say that when we say private sector, sometimes we just try to focus on corporations, but I think the ambition with respect to SDGs and the way the goals are formulated, virtually every business, small or big, not only big corporations, one way or another contribute to the SDGs. So they all need to be given due importance. They all need to be engaged, including their role in terms of recognizing their contribution. And that, again, in some ways, monitoring and evaluation can be important when you look at the broad macro picture. With respect to VOPEs, I would like to say that, this community is now active in over 95 countries, evolved over last 15, 20 years. And this is from VOPE, for colleagues who might not be familiar, some at least, is voluntary organizations for professional evaluation. Lots of M&D experts, managers, researchers constitute this vast community, which has now grown into tens of thousands of people, many, many associations, community of evaluators, societies, and so on in developing countries, developed countries, middle income, high income, low income, everywhere. This is a very important potential resource, which seems very strong in terms of supply side when it comes to M&D professionalism, but it is still struggling to find space in terms of being vital, in terms of making concrete contribution. And this is one thing that I think this conference should try to come up with in terms of some concrete ideas as to how the engagement of VOPEs, their contributions can be optimized, given their commitment, given their expertise, and given the potential role that they can have in terms of measurement, monitoring, and evaluation. With respect to actual challenges, again, looking at in terms of broad picture, when we look at different stakeholders, there is a cultural divide in terms of how different groups might look at SDGs. To what extent private sectors, businesses feel responsible, feel a role in terms of SDGs? To what extent the governments are able to bring out the private sector and the CSOs and promote their engagement in terms of widening of ownership, sharing a feeling of responsibility in terms of the goals, and engaging them in a very meaningful, concrete way by sharing a common vision for prosperity. I think this is very fundamental because a number of countries are still struggling. There are global compacts. The whole SDGs, the way they were made, it was a global compact from, of course, national actors, national leaders. But that kind of compact still has not gone to national level in terms of that level of ownership, and compact within different fragments of society, different sectors, to bring that compact at the national level and subnational level. Some countries have done good work in that, but a majority of countries are struggling. And let me also remind that COVID-19 has taken us several years backwards, both in terms of launching and advancement of SDGs, but also in terms of creating newer problems that were not there. So we have now a double challenge to that we have to address, and we are left with 10 years to go. Obviously, SDGs are not only government responsibility, and there is a little bit of that sense that government is leading and government is accountable to SDGs because the commitment came from mainly from government and mainly from heads of states, from the state parties. But again, how do we take that to the private-public partnership to the, again, CSRs and other smaller contributions from large-scale companies, smaller businesses, CSOs, one way or another, that has not really gone beyond government in a meaningful way. The way SDGs have been integrated at the national level is through planning processes. We have seen the approach to taking SDGs and integrating them into national development plans. Virtually every country that has committed to it at different times has done it. Some have done it in a very ambitious way. Some have done it more in a smaller way. But most countries have achieved that part. In doing that, they have also incorporated M&D principles, because there is voluntary national reporting, but also performance management, performance measurement for their own accountability and learning. But we know that planning in most countries and M&D are weak. Planning does not, the implementation does not follow planning. And within that, M&D is a neglected area. How can we bring in the new demand that the SDGs pose in terms of strengthening M&D into a weak, into a substandard national planning process? So this is a major challenge within this context.
You have muted yourself. Can you just unmute yourself?
How did that happen? Sorry.
Okay.
Within that, can we expand that vision to say that not only the government-led programs, the public sector programs should have a strong M&D system and should be supported by that to ensure accountability and getting better results and learning, but also can we take that culture to the big private-public partnership initiatives, to the CSR. These are all interrelated. It's a national issue. It's not only a question of the public sector and or the other sectors. They all need to come together. And again, there is cultural issue. The supply part when it comes to M&D tends to be strong, thanks to the enormous amount of capacity development, especially at the individual level, especially at the WOPE level, in terms of researchers, scientists, and so on. That community has grown very, very large over the past decade. But if you look at the demand side, the enabling environment, there are major issues there. We struggle that all the time. If we go to national level, those challenges become more serious. And again, how do we take SDGs to the subnational level, and how do we build capacity, meaningful capacity in terms of partnership at that level? I think that's something we need to address in a much more systematic way. I must say that I also looked at the examples of some of the countries from both worlds, the high income and from low and middle income as well. There are countries like Malaysia, Tanzania, Botswana, to some extent Sri Lanka, Nepal comes as well, at least to some extent, the good progress was being made. And then we are at a halt right now because of several reasons. And then if we look at the developed countries that have exemplary M&D systems and very strong in terms of more independent monitoring and reporting, use of evaluation in terms of SDG reporting are Finland, Switzerland, Canada, with a very strong civil society engagement in monitoring and reporting, Netherlands, and so on. So I think we have good combination of countries that have a lot to offer in terms of lessons, but we still have to go a long way. In terms of other challenges.
Dr. Krishna, can you just make it a little faster, 30 seconds?
Okay, couple of minutes, give me please. Okay.
No, 1 minute.
In terms of other challenges, they are of more technical nature in terms of looking at measurement and MSC itself. Of course, there are issues with data. SDGs demand, there are hundreds of indicators there, 169 or something. No, that's targets, hundreds of indicators, and some of those are very complex. Some are still, they are developing tools how to collect. So that challenge is still there while we are struggling to collect data on something that can easily be, collected. With respect to evaluation itself, the guidelines are very clear in terms of what needs to be done in terms of integrating evaluation into SDG monitoring and reporting particularly, but the use of evaluative evidence is weak. And there again, because of weak evaluation system, because of weak evaluation culture, among stakeholders we are talking about, including the public sector. That whole cultural transformation to bring in better evaluative thinking, integrating evaluation, we have a long way to go into that. Chela, tell me, I would also ask you to initiate about what could be done, but I think that can come later.
No,
These are
that's
what
what
I
I
have
think,
highlighted challenges
Dr.
and
Krishna.
some
I
examples.
think that is good to start with. So you'll be there, and you can come in whenever there is a need to come in. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Krishna. So Karen, you want to come in for a...
Yes, please. Thank you so very much, Chela.
Yeah.
So thank you. First and foremost, before we get started and continue with the conversation, I'm going to request everybody to please rename yourself, because it helps us to know you better much faster as well, especially when there are so many people in the room. So, I think most of you would be familiar with this. If you could just put your name and your organization, rename yourself with your name and organization, and perhaps even the city or country where you are, that will really be great for us to know how the room is panning out in terms of what are the profiles of people in the room. So I have just done it for myself, Karan Shaiva, and then, oops, I put our organization in. All right, so iDobro and Mumbai. Yeah. Can we have, yeah, there you go. So Karan Shaiva, iDobro and Mumbai, yeah? So that's the first thing I'd like to get done. I'm sorry. The second thing is, as Chela said, in terms of how to take the roundtable forward, this is a roundtable, and we do have experts in the room who have got so much of experience to share with us, and we've just heard two of them. And as we go forward, we are opening this up so that you are also part of the conversation and part of this thing. We want you to use the chat box very, very effectively, so that every time there is a fleeting thought or you have something, please put it down on the chat box right away, so that we can also pick on it as and when we can bring it in at the relevant places for the conversation that we are having. Also, that will allow us not to miss anything in case we are not able to get around to get you into the conversation. But definitely, please use the chat box and do come in terms of when we start doing it, and which is what we are going to do right now, right, Chela? Open it up to this thing. So,
Right.
So the way we look at the roundtables in the RISE World Summit, one is, as we said, our USPs, we have no panels and no presentations. The second is also that we have a kind of a phased wise 3 sections, like what Chela just said, 3 parts to it. So I'll just maybe very briefly say. So the first part we talk about is like the challenges. We've already had 2 great speakers who have kind of, given us some of their insights onto what is it that we have to achieve the SDG goals, but it's not yet happened, right? And there is a need to do a lot of things to make that happen. So from that point of view, what are some of the challenges that you are facing to really, really monitor your work, to really measure and manage the SDGs, thinking from that point of view? So please start thinking about the challenge, yeah. And from challenges, we will be moving to capabilities and collaboration, but we'll talk about that a little later. I think let's start with the challenges, Chela. Do you think that's a great idea?
Yes, I think that's what it's meant actually. So
awesome.
We can.
Awesome.
We
Please.
can
over to you. So, yes. And if we could request you to just put your hands up, just because it'll become easier to bring you into the conversation, but definitely happy to do that. Yeah, Chela,
so we will take up a few. I think that perhaps I see also the chat box, 2 things which are coming. Let me highlight that, and maybe some.
Sonal has put a hand up, Chela. You want to call her in?
Yes, okay. So Sonal's also made a chat box. Okay, right. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in incorporating SDGs, there is a huge problem in talking about gender within SDGs. So most of the voluntary national reviews that have taken place, that's almost 100 of them so far, have indicated that there are gender blind SDGs. Almost 7 of them are gender blind. And for example, number 6, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, number 7, number 9, 12, 14, 15, 17, they're completely gender blind. And then there are 4 of them that are gender sparse. such as the one on zero hunger, reducing inequality, number 10, 11 sustainable cities, and even climate action. It has only one gender specific indicator. So we are really struggling that when we talk about leave no one behind, how do you incorporate both gender and equity? Because that's what gender is all about within that. So that's a huge challenge. And that challenge relates to both in terms of knowledge as well as skills and competencies in order to do that. And we are still struggling halfway through the SDGs. I'd like to throw it out.
Thank you. Yes, Sonal, thank you for bringing that thing up, because I think it is very critical. And in fact, we in fact bring in the gender lens in everything we try and do. So thank you for bringing that up straight away. Great. Thank you. Anybody else with any other challenge? Yeah, Chella, please.
Yeah. So do you see anyone in the chat?
Oh, I saw your hand up.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else would like to speak about any other challenge with respect to the SDGs?
Okay, so I see one chat box there, the challenge of inequalities in remote education in the COVID scenario. So I think this COVID is one important aspect we need to really kind of talk about. I think we also will be sharing about, in the sense one of our experts is going to talk about that. Right. That is already there. So if Mabel is there, she said she will.
Yes, Mabel is in. Mabel is here. We could ask.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mabel. We can hear you. Yeah.
Thank God. My apologies to everyone. I think what I went through in logging on is one of the challenges of monitoring and evaluation.
Technology, the use of technology.
The use of technology, and especially in COVID times. Otherwise, I guess a lot of these sessions would have been live, and we would be talking to each other in person. But I think typically this portrays the challenges we have in understanding programs, understanding communities, especially in these times, because we are so physically removed. And both in terms of monitoring as well as on-site program evaluations, we relied so much on physically being there, the touch, the feel, interaction, one-on-one with communities, with different stakeholders. And we've been, forced to move to an in-screen, a chat box, a small TV screen kind of a module now. And because of that, so much has had to change in such a short time. And not just the donors, the funders, the corporates, government, but also program implementers, communities themselves have had to quickly realign to the new formats that are currently are the only ways to communicate in that sense. So I would say, and monitoring, evaluation has been a constant area of much debate. Initially it started off with the moot question itself, that the development sector, how does one quantify several direct or indirect impacts that are there. And if, the question a few years back was, is it possible to quantify at all in the first place? And of course, it is possible to quantify, it is possible to measure, it is possible to also ensure and calibrate the impacts that we all know. But this was not, the scenario a few years back. Now that systems have become more attuned, and everyone in the ecosystem is looking at the effectiveness and the impacts of the investments being made, especially coming in from a CSR point of view. I think the challenge on both sides is to, to have a design which is fair, which is just, which fulfills the objective of providing a feedback loop to the communities also in terms of how the programs or the interventions are working or not working for them, but also to, of course, the funders, the donors, and governments about data relating to how investments are paying off, and whether this input is helping the program stay on the right track. So it is a very, very valuable tool for decision making as well.
Sure. Thank you so much,
And
Mabel.
thank you, Mabel. I just one question, because related to the question which came from Geetanjali, Ms. Geetanjali. That is specifically speaking from the point of COVID situation now. And how it has really kind of affected the CSR programs in a different way. So whether there is any kind of change, CSR program especially linked to SDGs, what are the kind of changes you see, or it's the same as that and only the kind of perspective remains? Can you just say a few words on that, please?
Okay, so I would say that the focus on SDGs has become a lot more pronounced, or in that sense, the social situation that the entire pandemic challenge has, the churning that it has thrown up, helps, or in that sense makes us want to focus more on some of the core issues, like poverty, like access, like education or health, nutrition, hunger, which have become, I would say, in a lot of ways more pronounced because of the economic as well as the social challenges that this pandemic has thrown up. I would say the focus on SDGs is a lot more, and this situation has set us back, if not by by a few years at least. So there is a lot of lost ground, which needs to be regained in very soon. Also, if you look at it thematically, I think areas pertaining to education, livelihoods have really taken up a massive hit, and these are some of the challenges, with respect to how to get things back on track. Now, also, it has thrown up unique challenges in the CSR domain, because I think what we used to rely on a lot earlier was the whole issue of being able to be on site, being able to interact with communities, being able to interact with people one-on-one live, and get that kind of feedback and inputs into whatever we wanted to do, and also in terms of how things were happening on site or on field. But today that avenue is much restricted. So we find that the entire M&E framework that would first be valid has now had to be tweaked a lot. And to share our own experience, we've actually seen this also as a boon, because digitization has really helped us, pushed us to think so much of different ways in of communicating. And I think some communities have also adapted to that pretty quickly. So I see a lot more of our self-help groups, or even our watershed development committees and all that, much more amenable to coming on a video call, or doing a WhatsApp site visit, and us being able to interact with rural communities on Zoom, these kind of things. But of course, access to data, access to networks, all these things again on the other side kind of heighten the divide.
Thank
So
you.
even in these times, like communities or education.
Yeah, so I think that is good for maybe later we'll come on that again. Yeah. Okay, so just to move on, just we'll take up one more chat box comment, and also the show of hands from Mr. Kumar. So just to start with chat box comment to all panelists from Anita is the mainstreaming of emergency preparedness among community as well as organization needs and impact assessment. As I understand that, how do you really kind of bring in this mainstreaming of emergency preparedness, etc., into this impact assessment? Any panelists like to say a few words on that? The panelist, I would suggest let's stick to a very, very short, brief intervention or response. Let's not drag it, because we have got a few more experts to come in. Of course, many participants are waiting to make their interventions. Any panelists on this mainstreaming of emergency preparedness?
Yeah, Anita here.
Okay.
So I'll be very quick in my response. So looking at this current year, like Corona times, we have seen a lot of developmental impacts have been actually washed away. So communities have been pushed backward to poverty. So there is a extremely important need, to incorporate the way we have been talking about the gender mainstreaming in development agenda in SDG goals. Same way, this emergency preparedness among the communities also needs to be incorporated in SDG. And I would also mention one more point. I actually missed some of the points because of the poor connectivity. So in India, this is typical scene of India, that where CSRs do promote developmental agenda with local NGOs. The challenge over here is these projects are usually 1 to 1 year basis. So that becomes a kind of a setback. Not very like, how do we look at this scenario when you have a project of 1 year and then we talk about the sustainability agenda? Okay. These are a few challenges which I face.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I think Dr. Simi would like to make just add one small comments to this emergency things.
Yes, and Mr. Solomon, thank you so much for that opportunity. So very quickly, I think, I want to kind of mention one thing that, on one hand, we have the CSR funding agencies. The other hand, we also have the NGOs. What we witnessed during the Corona times was that even though the government had given a lot of relief material to be distributed and kind of, made a lot of policy adjustments, and also a lot of, funds were kind of, released. However, the entire supply chain or the framework really was kind of, coming loose. Here, the NGOs were then kind of, called upon to take up a role which, they were not really prepared for, which is acting as an extended arm for the government to actually implement the relief agencies and the relief measures at the ground level. So I think somewhere the NGOs need to be kind of, educated on the process, how to go about it. They did a fantastic job, a really fantastic job. But I think it could have been much more quicker and better in quality had we been prepared for it. So I think this calls for a gap that needs to be addressed either through policy or through, very targeted, maybe capacity development.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Maybe I will request Dr. Tita to come in, because now he has the I mean, in the sense, in terms of his focus, it will be more or less on this line. I would request him to come out with his insights. Perhaps then after that, we will take up the questions or the other comments from the participants and responses from the experts. Dr. Tirtha, can you come in, please?
As we asked, maybe focusing on 3 areas, on partnership, on issues of government programs, and also in M&E, 3 areas as you suggested. Let me start with partnership. Government of Nepal alone. Partnership among government, private sector, and civil society is considered as a crucial strategy to realize this global agenda. There is a representation of private sector and civil societies in our SDG National Steering Committee and the goal-wise thematic committees. The engagement differ. Actually, in doing policy and developing frameworks, we consult with private sector and civil societies. We collaborate in identifying priorities, in assigning responsibilities and building capacities, and especially in investment, implementation, measuring and monitoring. There is a good partnership among these different actors, stakeholders. So the private sector and civil societies and other actors can fit in their engagement, make them SDG oriented. For this, we recently conducted SDG assessment, costing and financing strategy, where we identified a broader area of interventions for private sector and civil societies where they can fit in their engagement. We need to go further and identify concrete areas where private sector and civil societies can contribute. But one of the areas one of the issues that we are finding in our case, in a police case, is how can we reorient investment of private sector and then to make in the levelized context, because government have very little incentive to offer to the private sector, even in CSR. One of the best practice of partnership in Nepal is in M&E, where under government leadership, we developed a 5-year evaluation action plan where BOPs and UN agencies and all the academia were engaged. Their activities are also incorporated in this 5-year evaluation action plan. We just finished and then are in the process of reviewing the first evaluation action plan. And then we're also thinking to bring in the next 5-year action plan, where in activities of government, civil societies, and then even BOPs will be incorporated. And the focus is on policies, expansion of evaluation studies, and especially in capacity building in M&E and also use of evaluation findings. And that is working well. In regards to challenges in government programs, that's the second area that I'm giving my inputs. I found there are broad 4 areas of challenges. We did SDG coding of each project in our annual budget book, government programs and projects, and reoriented ongoing projects, make them SDG friendly. One of the challenges is how to reorient ongoing program where there is huge sunk cost, economically, socially, and politically. That is one of the challenges we are facing. Second challenge is, as we are discussing just before, is mainstreaming inclusion agenda in ongoing programs. Because technically speaking, when we appraise our projects, we mostly focus on doing financial and economic analysis, but forget to do the distributional impacts. That is where the returns of the projects go to marginalized, to women, or to the richer household again, so that it widens inequality. And the third thing, the issue that we are facing is we are not that expert so far to institutionalize concept of theory of change in our projects and programs in the government sector. So it is not whether there is implementation or theory failure in case projects fail to achieve anticipated results. And especially last challenge that I want to mention here is that is induced by COVID-19. COVID-19 induced lockdowns really obstructed the implementation of many development programs, including that contribute to SDGs and the program related to CSR. This pandemic not only delaying implementation or increased cost of interventions, but also significantly reversing positive trends of the most of the SDGs, and that mostly hinder the disadvantaged part of the societies. Since the private sector enterprises, especially medium and small scale industries, have heavily suffered from COVID, I think that may destroy their implementation in CSR. Then the third area that I want to capture now is on M&E. In M&E, we have been focusing to institutionalize evaluation in the government system. We are poor in evaluation actually, so that we are collaborating with BOPES and other academia and experts, so that we jointly developing our frameworks and focus on building capacities. Actually, we did our baselines and with milestone 2019, 2020 to 2025 and 2030, engaged in the BNR process twice in 2017 and 2020. And the first progress report is in the final stage of publication. We're also systematically trying to institutionalize evaluation, starting from evaluation policy. Our evaluation, Monitoring and Evaluation Act is in the Parliament. It is drafted by the government, but there was heavy engagement and inputs from BOPES as well. So it is a joint document, joint evaluation policy document, which is in the Parliament, and that would serve the evaluation policy that also considers to institutionalize evaluation that contribute to SDGs. Fourth area is actually demanding demand, conduct, and use of evaluations, which is an ongoing process where our capacity is lacking. And then now there is growing recognition, even in the government, that evidences be used, evaluation-based evidences be used in policy making. But so far, the coverage of evaluation is not that broad. We have started even to do internal evaluations. For instance, this fiscal year, even National Planning Commission is leading to evaluate 10 programs and projects. But so far, policy evaluation is very weak in our context, where our focus should be. In regards to data, there is issue of data.
Yeah, can you just another 30 seconds? Can you just?
Yes, I'll complete it within half. Yeah, within 1 minute. Sorry. Nepal's M&E system need to develop in a way that also captures periodic assessment of SDG-related CRR interventions, because it is so far focused only on government system, government programs and projects, and partnership with both societies and academia. Actually, in implementing these evaluation-based activities in policy making, in capacity building, has been very much important. There, our focus will be. So I stop here.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Tita. I think that from the point of government, and you have come out with the different aspects, especially the challenges, the different challenges you are facing. I think Dr. Krishna Balbese also talked about the private and public partnership. Now, I'm just trying to kind of link up with a question which has come up from Amit Tata, saying that in the sense there was a rare occasion when the government explicitly reached out to the NGO community. Need to build more trust and capacity in this ecosystem. I think this is something we have been really kind of trying to focus on, especially this roundtable as well. It would be good to get some response from the panelists. And can I ask either Nita or perhaps Mr. Dr. Krishna Bandrase to come? And maybe after that, we can ask also the other participants to respond very briefly.
Yeah, actually, we have made a lot of from Niti Aayog and the central government in India. There has been a lot of attempts to involve NGOs in SDG interventions, and also in the COVID scenario. A lot of efforts have been made, and there has been a stupendous experience with that, and a lot of interventions from the NGO side. As far as the COVID is concerned, about 92,000 civil society organizations were involved in the process of providing data, making interventions at the local level, and also, helping the government reach out to different affected communities. So, as far as so this has been a very important effort in building trust, mutual, clarifying mutual expectations, and building up long-term relationships. And this is also in tune with the kind of work that we did during the last VNR, the Voluntary National Review of India, in which we had engagement of with more than 3,000 civil society organizations across the country, having consultations with vulnerable communities. We had about 75 consultations across the country, and to talk about issues of exclusion, issues of how we can actually have more inclusive kind of interventions. And a lot of inputs came, and a lot of new insights were generated regarding government programs and government policies. So that way, there has been a lot of headway made in this process, but that also exposed, many more things to be done on a regular basis. For instance, to look at the expectations of smaller NGOs, smaller community-based organizations, and also build bridges wherever there are problems in terms of policy implementation. There are problems in terms of capturing the local diversity of people's needs, and how a particular program actually reaches out. So a lot of areas have come up, and it's also very challenging to, particularly in the context of India, such a diverse and vast country, and where the civil society sector is also very diverse with varieties of expectations and experiences. So this issue of building trust will be a work in progress, and there is a new new interest and enthusiasm in the government also to have the relationship built, and have kind of working alignments functional across different stakeholders. So that's why this is a very interesting area. I think a lot of work needs to be done, but we also need to be looking at the past experiences and the positive things that we have built up around this relationship.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mishra. Anyone else?
Stella, we have two people who have been wanted to come in.
Yeah,
so can we bring in Mr. Murthy and Gitanjali and even Ganpati ji?
Okay, please.
Can we bring in some of the?
Yeah. Please.
Great. Shall we start with Mr.
Murthy? Yes.
Murthy?
Yes, Mr. Murthy. Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I have been listening to the experts speak about this, and I have a couple of comments on this, which I would just like to put across. The first thing is that there has been a lot of talk about CSR and how corporates are doing their bit in achieving the SDGs, in many of the SDGs, etc. But my basic contention is that as things stand today, CSR and any other socially related activity is an afterthought in the business process. We look at profits first, and 2% of our profits or 5% of our profits is then earmarked for CSR. A better way would be, let us look at CSR first, allocate a percentage of our budget to CSR to begin with, and then look at profit. This would be much more meaningful exercise as compared to doing it as an afterthought. In the years that we don't make profits, we don't do any CSR, which is sort of a knee-jerk reaction and shirking away from our social responsibilities. The second thing that I would like to say is that when we are engaging in as part with the social society, how much of an interaction do we even have with the local governments? Are we ever talking with our local governments to ask them how our tax money is being used? As corporates, we end up paying, or even as individuals, we end up paying a sizable amount of income tax and other local government taxes. There is absolutely no way, no mechanism that exists today whereby we can engage with the local governments to ensure that our tax money is used in our local region. Even, I'm not saying the entire, but even a fraction of it, there is just no way we can do it. As large corporates with huge muscle, monetary muscle lying in with them, it would be a great social service if they can step in and take this kind of an action. And I'm talking about this from experience. This is happening in other economies. There is a case of Dan Price in Seattle, who has voluntarily, just one more minute, Chilla. Dan Price, who actually went before the City Council of Seattle and said, increase my taxes, but invest the money in the Seattle metropolitan area. I don't know of any such case in India. Thank you.
Mr. Murthy, I think he is raising one important question in terms of the accountability mechanism and how this M&E can also be kind of related. I think now one of the main things we have been talking, or we should be talking about, the M&E and the kind of capacity need, not only the kind of international funding, it is also in the CSR program, as well as the government program, how this partnership, one way on M&E is being built. I think that is one issue I think getting kind of, highlighted. Thank you, Mr. Murthy. So Karen, who else is there wants to come in?
We had Gitanjali Kaur, who had earlier also posted. If we could bring her in, that would be great, because she's again posted, some of the work of this. Gitanjali, would you like to say a few words and bring in your perspective as well, please?
Yeah, hi. My only question here is because I'm associated with civil societies and we have working in the slum communities on education, but monitoring and evaluation is a huge concern. We are dealing with mobilizers who are basically from the community, within the communities, and they haven't worked much. Given the education qualification, yes, we are doing trainings and capacity buildings, but they are not effective because of the remote training methods that we are adopting. So, and also there are students who have access to digital platforms like smartphones. Amazon has given tablets. We've set up community learning centers, but the immediate problem is getting the children to learn continuously. Because of the family issues, most of them, they do not even attend the classes. So learning itself is an issue. After that, monitoring and evaluation. How do we evaluate a thin attendance first, and how effective is that? Is a big challenge that we are facing here.
Okay, so thank you. I think that will be taken up and responded by panelists a little later. And before that, I would like to...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just had an issue here rather than giving a solution.
Yeah.
That's okay. We also had challenges.
Okay, so Ganpati ji,
Ganpati ji, if we can bring him, please.
I'll be speaking about the partnership. When we talk of the partnership, generally people talk of, private-public partnership, but often in practice, the partnership with people is missing. So we should not always talk of only people, public and private, but also we have to add one more P, which is people. That is one thing I would like to add here, because we are talking of no one leaving behind. Unless the people are involved in the partnerships, people will be left behind. That's one part. And secondly, when we talk of the partnership, people come into partnership, organizations come into partnership if there is benefit being in the partnership. So in the partnership, everybody should have some kind of gain, some kind of benefit. Then only they will come into the partnership. So we have to look some areas where everybody is benefited in partnership. Otherwise, the partnership will not last long. That's another thing. And thirdly, which came out also before, is the trust building. Unless trust is built among the partners, there will not be good partnership. Also, so this part also should have to be considered well. And the thirdly, what I would like to say is also the complementarity. The partnership go well if there is complementarity. Rather than competition, it requires cooperation. But our society is more of in competition rather than cooperation. That's why this is another area which we should also consider when we are talking of the partnership. And lastly, the continuous involvement from the inception stage to the evaluation stage, to the user stage is required if we are talking of the partnership. That's all I.
Thank you, Gunabdiji. I think that those are very crucial points. I don't want to go again on that. I think that is the benefit and partnership with the people and trust building and complementary. That's very, very crucial role. But I would be good actually. So if Neeta comes in, because when it comes to even to the previous participants' comment about this accountability and some of these points, if you can respond from the point of corporate and the CSR, that would be good. Neeta, can you come in?
Sure, Chila. I think a lot of what I would have wanted to say has already been mentioned. I think what I will add is that some amount of transparency. So over the past few years, we've noticed certain surveys, etc., are not released in the public space because there are disagreements perhaps in terms of the findings of the surveys, etc. Building trust also requires transparency. And so I think when steps like this are taken unilaterally, they don't go a long way in building either trust or accountability becomes a problem. I also wanted to support this whole idea that we could use community institutions and community-based organizations. So during this COVID era, women's self-help groups have surprised everyone, including the state rural livelihood missions, in terms of how they've responded to the crisis, producing PPE kits, where India was, at the beginning of the COVID crisis, India did not have enough PPE equipment and masks. By the end, we were exporting it. We had so much left over. So I think we can place a lot of faith and trust in community-based organizations such as women's collectives and Panchayati Raj institutions, etc. If we can help build capacity from that direction as well, it's not just accountability and accountability top-down. That is a very important part of it as well, but also ground up, where community-based organizations are demanding transparency, accountability, and service. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I would like to also bring in Mr. Ashwin from Tata Capitals. He could talk, I think it's what he has, and it's also relevant to the questions we are discussing. Ashwin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm there. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please, we can hear you.
Yeah, tell me, sir.
No, can you just respond to this, the questions like the accountability or how we really kind of, CSR linked to the profit? Otherwise, what happens? There are different related questions. So you have any
Yeah, so my take on the CSR profitability is, yes, I understand. I agree with the previous participant, where he said like that if there are no profits, you don't do the CSR work, which is relevant. But then it's actually it's not that way. It's basically 3 years average profit. So in one of the year when you don't make profit, you have to take 2 years profit and then compute the CSR. But again, it's left as whole to whether to continue with the CSR program or not. But we at Tata's have been doing the CSR before the inception of the rule actually. So it's basically inbuilt in our culture. Now, your second question is about the accountability, correct? Yeah. So we are associated with a project which is in Mokhada, that is in Maharashtra. I don't know if the participants in this room are aware of it. Mokhada is basically from Mumbai, about 160-70 kilometers away, and it's in the rain excess area actually. There's a lot of rainfall every year, but then by the end of the rainfall, June, July, August, September, October, there is no water for them to drink actually. Now with solar and all, we're giving them water for agriculture as well as for drinking. Now from a place where they had no water in the next 9 months or 8 months, they're going to get water now. Now there comes the question of accountability. How well we put our systems to make these people accountable, not only for the natural resources but also for their lives. Because tomorrow they're going to get water and they're going to get water in excess. So how they're going to use it? What they're going to do with that? So we have a whole chart of whole line of things, which we have prepared for the villagers to follow. Now it's a new project, I understand, and also the proof of the pudding is in eating. So we'll have to give ourselves some time to understand how the villages, the community at large takes care of this project, and how do we make them accountable. Today or tomorrow, corporates have to exit out of the projects and make the community more sustainable. So that is when they have to take the projects forward and make themselves accountable to themselves actually. So that's my take on this actually.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think one more aspect which is also quite interesting, which Dr. Kanapathy was raised, the benefit in being in the partnership. I think he is talking about how the different stakeholders involved benefit. I think that's for me at least. I feel somewhere this has to be really kind of clear. So no one is doing out of mercy, and there is always some expectations. If you can stay on that point, because that really brings kind of fills the gap and helps us to move forward in partnership. Any comments on that from the participants or panelists?
Yeah.
Karen, any show hands or any panelists would like to come on that particular point? Okay. 2 participants raise hands. Who are those? Karen, can you see? I don't see the name. Okay, whoever is raised, can you just come in, please?
Yeah, definitely. We have Mr. Amit Datta, from UNDP. Yeah, yes. Why don't you come?
Good morning, everyone. Amit Datta from KPMG. So, having worked very closely with the government on monitoring and evaluation of centrally sponsored schemes for social welfare, I think one of the key learnings from that experience has been that we really need, creation of open data ecosystems, between the government and various other stakeholders. Of course, now the government has kind of moved totally towards digital. There's a strong thrust on building MIS platforms and, a lot of data analytics and big data. All of that is beginning to happen. But, building an open data ecosystem where, you can get insights of what's happening in the larger external ecosystem, whether it's the private sector, whether it's CSOs, NGOs. I mean, there is so much of data, but, is that data interoperable? Is that data being exchanged in a manner that it can be made more actionable? I think that was my limited intervention here. and something to think about, that whatever data architecture that we are building, if it's still insulated within, government to government or, within the private sector, I don't think it's really creating that much of value as it would if we have more of an open data ecosystem.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Amit. Chela, maybe I just want to say something, as moderator, I don't tend to talk too much because I rather give the people to talk. But here, this is something which I really feel very, very strongly about. And so I'd really appreciate if I can get a couple of minutes actually to say.
No, that is another show of hands. Okay, maybe you can ask that person to come in, then you can intervene.
Yeah, I'll just complete and then. So what happens is, I think the whole problem with data is the lack of differentiation between micro data and macro data. More often than not, we get so tied down with micro data that we say that no, unless we have the micro data, we will not be able to share anything. That's kind of a thing. But recently for the pandemic, we have started focusing on macro data. So even if we can get those data points that can give us insights in learning to understand gaps, I think that is more than enough sometimes. And that's where the partnerships tend to fail because people are so worried about the, sharing of data, etc. And then things don't go further. So I think that's something people need to also think and start considering, that can we deal with micro data that allows us to truly share and learn from each other. I think it'll make a big difference. Yeah. So yeah, from a show of hands, I think we had Mabel who had put up her hands a little earlier. So Mabel, do you want to go in next? Yeah.
So I just wanted to make a very quick point about partnerships. I mean, that's something which all of us say that we need to collaborate more about, but it's one of the most difficult things to kind of, get off the ground and keep it in a great working condition. One of the participants made a remark, some time back, and I really want to second that, because partnerships work when, there is a win-win for all collaborators involved in it. And we've also seen from experience in L&T and in collaborating both with government as well as, the NGO sector or even other corporates, that what actually works well is having very clear, boundaries for who will do what and how that will be done. So I think these very two quick points, that is, having a win-win for everyone and having very clear set goals, boundaries and definable areas, because these are things that really keep partnerships going. That's it from me.
Oh, thank you, Mabel. That's quite a good intervention. Yes, so that is now perhaps I would also request that Mr. Mishra to come in because he has got few other points to share. Then after that we can go to the participants and perhaps we will later wrap it up.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. Actually, I'll briefly talk about the monitoring and basically monitoring and measuring data on SDGs, whatever is happening from the government side, and also briefly talk about the problems and challenges there. Let me just briefly talk about the nuts and bolts first. As people may be knowing, we have a national indicator framework, which is basically led and developed by the Ministry of Statistics in collaboration with NITI Aayog and other ministries and state governments. It has at this point of time 302 indicators, quite a vast number of indicators. And if we include the bits, for instance, look at the disaggregation and other kinds of things, then it actually adds up to quite a lot, more than 400 bits of data. So, and then we have, for that NIF, National Indicator Framework, to be operative, we have various sectoral groups as well as a high-powered group to actually evaluate data and also take measures towards improving the availability of data across the country. So this is the broad kind of framework against which the impact gets measured at this point of time. And then we have a lot of states have come up with state indicator frameworks, and also some of them have come up with district indicator frameworks. At this point of time, we have 21 states who have state indicator frameworks, which are basically speaking to the local priorities and local requirements of those particular states. And we have about 12 states who have district level indicator frameworks, which is great going, as far as, data-based monitoring and evidence-based programming is concerned. So that is the kind of, data environment which is getting slowly and steadily built up. And then we have, on the basis of that, Niti Aayog does an annual, monitoring exercise, which is the SDG India Index. Most of you might have a look at the index reports and the kind of ranking which has happened to states and union territories, and which has also generated a lot of interest among them in terms of having a competitive advantage across the country, vis-a-vis other states. So this, the SDG India Index actually, at this point of time for this year, we have taken 115 indicators on which we have data availability across all the states and union territories. And we are trying to see, this is actually from 62 in the first year to 100 the next one, and now 115. It is steadily going ahead in terms of improving granularity of monitoring. So this is broadly the environment in the on which basically monitoring and evaluation will take place, and it's taking place at this point of time. So let me quickly list out some of the challenges. Some of them have already been talked about participants here. See, the one thing is that data availability, like, we say that a lot of data are available, but, a lot of data which comes from particularly civil society and those organizations who are working on the grassroots, and they have very important data. But in terms of, making them to speak to a particular targets or particular indicators across, a geographical stretch, that becomes a very challenging thing. So data availability is a very important issue because, with all the kind of efforts that have been made over the last 3-4 years, even out of the 302 indicators which are in NIF, we have only data at this point of time on 250 indicators across the country, and only comparable data across states and union territories only in 115 that I was just talking about in terms of in the context of the SDG India Index. So that's why we have to do a lot of work in terms of making more data available, and also how we can have data from business sector and NGOs and all that, and get them to at the macro level. So we need to have data integrity processes in place which can handle this kind of challenge. Then we have the periodicity problem, because we have data from 5-year surveys, 3-year surveys, and we have the census also. We depend on census for a lot of information, even on the NIF. And census, as you know, is a 10 years interval. So we do not actually have a lot of data on a regular basis. We need to have real-time data. Niti Aayog has been actually emphasizing to the importance of real-time data. At this point of time, we are far away from that. We are also considering unconventional ways of collecting information, for instance, using social media and having mobile-based data collection. But at this point of time, they have not been able to pass the checks of data integrity, and we have not been able to have breakthroughs there. So this is something which will going forward will be a very important issue where all stakeholders need to work together. And then another issue, which is there, to what extent data speak to the targets and the goals. Even now, SDGs actually are a very broad and very very comprehensive kind of framework, and a lot of indicators that they do not actually speak fully to the target. And so in order to have that, we need to really sharpen the indicators, and indicators can only be sharpened if data are available. So this is something which has to go hand in hand, and a lot of work has to be done. And then the administrative data is something which we depend a lot, which comes from implementation of different programs. over the last year or so, there have been a lot of interventions to streamline the administrative data across the states and UTs, and but for more needs to be done, and we are actually going ahead with that. The disaggregation, like all of you would like to have data across, the gender divide, across castes, class, minorities, and many different, because we have so many points of disaggregation to be made. Particularly if we look at the principle of leaving no one behind, disaggregation is very important. But at this point of time, disaggregation, the NIF does permit disaggregation to a very great extent, but we need more disaggregation, and that is something also, along with data availability, the issue of disaggregation is something which we are engaged with, and we'll try to have breakthroughs on that. And another thing is, the programs that we implement are very diverse. For instance, we have centrally sponsored and central sector schemes. We have states also having state level schemes, district level schemes. And then we have, if you add to that, the programs that NGOs and business sector implement. So we have a lot of activities which are generating, impact. So how to capture all those impact in terms of, in terms of data points is something which is very important. At this point of time, the national reporting which is happening on SDG do look at, mostly the data which comes from the central sector schemes and the centrally sponsored schemes. And a lot of micro programs, for instance, small programs implemented by states and other agencies are not integrated. They're not integrated because the integration is very challenging, because in terms of geographical stretch, in terms of other parameters of implementation. So we need to do a lot of work to see how we can actually get information from different programs onto the SDG monitoring canvas. So this is where I think this is a very big challenge. At this point of time, our priority is to just integrate the state and Indian territory programs where basically they are not part of the CSR, the centrally sponsored or central sector schemes. And then we'll slowly go towards other sectors like NGOs and business sector. So we have to really work out methodology how that can really be captured. So, this is something. These are some of the challenges which are there as far as monitoring is concerned, as far as data is concerned. Because if we are not able to measure progress, then it is very difficult to actually make progress. Because whatever is measured, that actually gets done on the ground. So that is something. It's easier said than done because we have so many data points and so many different stakeholders. But one thing which is happening is that, like we talked about partnership, we have found that partnership are actually working. We have actually, worked out with so many stakeholders to collect data and to get perspectives. So that has been very useful, and we'll try to make consistent progress on those fronts. So this is what I just wanted to highlight, the broad canvas and the issues. So thank you. I'll be very happy to take questions or also suggestions from participants.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mishra. Fantastic. And one Sonal Saveri would like to come for 1 minute. Wrap it up after that. We don't have much time.
Thank you very much. We've been talking a lot about data, but what I'd like to ask is, what about the utilization of data? How are we utilizing it? How are we using it for decision making? How are we using it to make adaptive changes to our programs? And finally, in the utilization, we collect data from our communities, but do we really go back and share with them our findings and what we've learned from them and help them to adapt as we go along? So utilization for decision making and adapting, contextualizing, finishing the feedback loop, and helping to improve our programs is, I think, an area that we need to challenge ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you, Sonal. I think that's very great intervention in terms of utilization of this data. Perhaps it's time to kind of wrap it up. Maybe a few minutes from me, then I will hand it over to Karen. So lack of time, we can't go into the participant more than this. Okay, so in terms of just concluding remarks, I'd like to point out, I think this whole roundtable sparked so many challenges, I think. Challenges from the point of government, from the point of the inclusiveness in terms of partnership. So many other areas which are related to SDGs have come up. But actually, very strangely, when I was going through the notes, it's very, very, very interesting to note one of the major components which stands out in all the discussions and the comments and the experts' intervention is the partnership, the synergies and partnership. When you talked about the synergies and partnership, there was talk about the mutual benefit, the trust, private and public partnership. Of course, this in that CSR, NGO, government. So this partnership and synergies of interventions towards SDGs stand out. And that's very, very crucial, which has come up, and we need to really kind of work out how we can really kind of partner in the future. COE is one thing. We are always looking for partnership with other, whether it is a government or CSR or the other NGOs or other the private practitioners. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is this inclusiveness and gender. I think though it's not much highlighted in terms of gender, I think that is one important component which Sonal highlighted. Perhaps we need to really kind of spend more on that. And of course, it is related to that is the data availability. I think Mr. Mishra spelled out a lot of things in that, and the data availability, which is very, very crucial for MNE and to really kind of check its performance, also see what are the kind of changes taking place towards SDGs and where do we really learn and how do we really kind of correct ourselves. I think that is one of the crucial component which has been highlighted, and that remains as a kind of challenge. We need to really kind of look at it. The third aspect is that the accountability. Accountability is not just the CSR fund. I think accountability at all levels, in all stakeholders. So whether it is CSR, whether it is the NGOs, whether it is the government or partnership between the different stakeholders, the accountability is one important component which stands out. We need to really kind of look at it. So these are kind of important thing. There are several other components which have come up, aspects which are highlighted in the chat box. We will be carefully kind of going through the chat box and taking down and trying to sort out. And some way or the other, either directly or through the organizer, the summit organizer, we will get in touch. See the Community of Evaluators of South Asia. We are so welcome to be in partner with other stakeholders, and whatever the platform we get, we will try to kind of relate. Whatever the opportunity we get, we are open to relate. And that is it from me. And thank you so much for the expert. Thank you also so much for the other participants for your valuable and active contribution. As Karen said, I had my own kind of initial hesitation, 2 hours, whether it's going to be pretty long and whether it's going to really bore the participants and the experts. I think now the 2 hours has gone just quickly. It has been very, very interesting and productive.
I told you, Chala. I told you. I'm pretty sure if we actually had the option to extend this, we would have people here even after an hour. So completely very, very confident about our methodology, because we've been doing it for 7 years now, and we know every roundtable, can be easily extended by another hour because people start getting so involved at the end of the conversation.
Okay, so thank you, Karen. I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Chala. So I'm going to close very quickly because we are running out of time. I just want to talk about 2 points very, very, briefly. Is that one is on the quality of monitoring and evaluation, and 2 is on the capacity building for monitoring and evaluation. I think one of the things, as evaluators in the field and working with corporate CSR programs for evaluation, one of the things that we have really had to struggle with is, when we get compared with many other kind of what should I say, possible offerings out there, where people, look at monitoring and evaluation as the as a submission of a report, and I really seriously sometimes think that is that the purpose of M&E? It is not, right? We all know as evaluators over here that the purpose is really to bring it back into the design of programs and initiatives so that you can really improve on it and scale it up and take it much, much further, right? And that somewhere is is a really sad thing, because a lot of reports are generated more from a compliance point of view and not really utilized back again. It's a report that is never seen ever again. When I've asked some of these clients, okay, when was the last time you all did it, and what do you know about that report, or what did it suggest to you? They have no idea, right? So I think that's my one quick point I want to add. The second is capacity building. I think there's a dearth of programs that really focus on capacity building for M&E, both from an institutional as well as from other service providers. And I think that's a great role that COE South Asia can play to really start looking at the capacity building of the sector and people in it. So I would just like to make that suggestion and hope that Chala, we can find ways to collaborate between us as well as with others, I'm sure, in the room who would be interested in doing something along these lines. So I think I'll stop there. I made it as quick. I saw 1 minute I took, Chala. Yeah, but I also have got a few housekeeping to close with. So one is, of course, I would encourage everybody to please check out the agenda of the Rise World Summit. There's a lot still happening and a lot still remaining to happen. There were 36 hours of continuous programming. We were up till 5 a.m. in the morning on some of the other programs. So do check it out. There's a lot happening, multiple tracks, in fact, happening. So do that. That's number one. Number two is we are creating LinkedIn groups to continue to stay in touch, because as Chala said, this is just the beginning. It's a conversation. This is not an event. It's a platform for us to continue to collaborate and find partnership opportunities among ourselves. And the last but not the least, I want to say is we are doing a research on SDGs that is being done by our institutional partners. And I hope that many of you will take that survey. It's a very brief one, but please do so, because it will really help us to take our programs further and get expert inputs into them. So thank you all very much. I think the last thing remaining to be done is the photo op, right? So I'm going to ask everybody, please turn on your video so that we can take a quick photograph for our records. So we can just take some quick pictures. Awesome.